Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. We have the US government buying $290 million worth of anti-radiation drugs just in case there's a nuclear war emergency. We have food processing plants, I should say greenhouses in places like the Netherlands, which is the second largest exporter of food, shutting down because of the energy prices. And we even have PayPal saying that they can charge you $2,500 in your account just in case you spread misinformation. Let's get started. Overall for the week, the markets were mostly positive. We had pretty good economic news, which kind of allowed investors to believe that, well, you know, maybe things are looking up for the fourth quarter. So overall, the stocks for the US, mostly positive. Canada was mostly positive as well. All of the markets in Europe, except for Russia, were positive. In Latin America, all of them were positive, including Brazil when they had their presidential elections between the socialist Lula and also the right-leaning conservative Bolsonaro. And then Africa and the Middle East was mixed, kind of even between all of them. And in the far, far east, we have the Nikkei being the most positive of all, and with the markets there being mostly positive as well. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency news, not a whole lot of news in the crypto space other than the fact that McDonald's has started accepting Bitcoin as payment in a store in Switzerland. So it looks like they're kind of testing the waters when it comes to the crypto payments. Remember that I still believe that the future is going to be the government coin, which is, you know, the CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. Ironic that they never found, you know, Satoshi Nakamoto, which is supposedly, quote unquote, the founder of Bitcoin. Bitcoin up for the week, over 1%, just a touch over 19,300. In the commodities, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's greenhouses in the Netherlands. And if you guys don't know what a greenhouse is, it's basically, think of it like a glass house, or literally just a structure which allows you to keep the temperature inside different than the temperature outside to induce better growing conditions. There's a number of growers that are starting to shut down their operations due to the energy prices. Remember that Netherlands, as I mentioned, is the second largest exporter of food in the world and 40% of the vegetables in Europe. HAK or Hack, which is one of the largest vegetable brands in Europe. They do a lot of the canned vegetables. They're shutting down their entire productions for 6 weeks due to high energy costs. So now we have a situation where they might not only freeze in the winter, but they might not even have food because we have all these, you know, food production companies that are literally shutting down. And I've read, like, what better way to force you to eat cricket vegetables and cricket protein because there's just no other food out there? Isn't it convenient? Bangladesh national power grid is collapsing. Not that Bangladesh is the most advanced country in the world, but there's 140 million citizens there that are completely without power. And outside of the northern part of the country, they're still mostly dealing with that. In the US, $290 million worth of anti-radiation drugs for use in a nuclear emergency was purchased by the US government. Wonder why they're doing that now and not before. I'll mention to you guys here in just a moment, a super nuclear sub from Russia has been deployed as well, and a bridge literally was just blown up. The main bridge between Crimea and also Russia and Ukraine took credit for it. So we'll get to that in just a moment because it seems like it's really starting to escalate now. Low water levels in the Mississippi River is threatening shipments. There's a barge company called Ingram Barge Company. If you guys don't know what a barge is, just picture like a big flat boat that has a bunch of containers and products on top. The Mississippi River, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest in all of the United States. And now they're starting to have problems shipping items on the river due to the historic low amount of water. If you guys remember the stones that were in the Rhine River, which is part of the border between France and Germany, that had the writings from the last shortage that they were having, you know, millennia ago, hundreds of years ago. I think it was the 1500s, where the rocks in the German river said, if you see this, weep, or if you see this, cry. It looks like the whole world is starting to have that problem. with the water. The OPEC Plus on Wednesday announced that they're going to reduce daily production by 2 million barrels, kind of spitting Biden right in the face because he went over there to try to convince him to increase production. The U.S. crude went up by over 16% to almost $93, whereas Brent went up over 11% to almost $98. And gas prices now are at over $1 a gallon higher on average than at any other point in history ever since the new administration took over. I'm sure you guys saw the little picture there with the graphs. And also, due to the drop of the dollar, gold went down, or excuse me, gold went up 2%, just over 2% to 1696, and silver went up 5.69% to 2022. I'm not a trading advisor. This isn't trading advice. I can't tell you guys where to enter and exit, but remember that I told you guys when it was at 18, not a bad time to start looking for some of the silver. Long term, I still think silver is extremely underpriced, especially with all the manipulation. And if you guys didn't know, silver goes into solar power plants. And in addition to that, the batteries in cars. So the demand for silver is exploding while they're not finding any new mines. That's why I'm such a big proponent of silver. Finance and banking news, billionaire investor Ray Dalio relinquishing control of his biggest hedge fund in the world, which is called Bridgewater Associates, that has $150 billion in assets. The United Nations is demanding that central banks around the world stop their price hikes to tame inflation and switch to price controls instead. And essentially what happens with price controls, for example, what's happened in Venezuela is that since the prices rise, then there's just going to be shortages everywhere because they just can't afford, a company's not going to produce electricity for a loss, for example, right? And the US is calling on the Fed, for example, to revert and try to avoid the bringing down of prices, which again, I just like, why is the UN in charge of this? Like, there's none of those suits. We never voted for them, right? But you know why they're doing it? Because they're the new world order. Monday, Australia raised rates by 25 basis points. They're at 2.60. New Zealand did so as well at 3.5. A lot more German firms in regards to the prices are announcing price hikes in the coming months, according to a survey from the IFO Institute. A lot of people are also expecting increasing in prices as well. U.S. Treasuries have their widest inversion in 22 years, which is another sign that the economic recession arrived. And if you guys don't know what that means, basically on the U.S. debt, right, we have long-term debt and we have short-term debt. So when the U.S. pays debt, which we're now at a record $31 trillion, there's debt that is short-term and long-term. So there's a 10-year treasury. A treasury is basically a loan, like a mortgage, for example. And then there's shorter terms as well. So when the interest rate from the longer-term debt increases and the lower debt, or the interest rate from the shorter-term debt, it's actually backwards. Let me start over. When the interest rate from the shorter term debt increases and then the interest rates from the longer term debt, it decreases, it creates an inversion because normally the shorter term debt has a lower interest rate because they can offer a lower interest rate because you get your money quicker, right? There's less risk implied. But then if it inverts, meaning that the shorter term increases and the longer term decreases, that means that there's a higher perceived risk in long-term debt because of the economic situation. And that's what implicates that we may be in a recession, which so far we actually are in a recession. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss was forced to make a U-turn after less than a month in power to do revenue cuts on the highest rate of income taxes there. Sparked a lot of turmoil and rebellion inside her own Conservative Party. Now they're planning on doing a new growth, obviously financed by debt, because it seems like the economy just can't function anymore without debt. They're going to cut taxes and regulation, in addition to borrowing a bunch of money, which is part of the reason why we all have inflation, and they're just going to keep, just pile a little more wood in the fire, more gasoline in the fire. Eurozone producer prices went up by 5% month over month. From a year ago, they are up over 43%. This is not only the cost to produce a product, but also the cost to produce a service, just so you know. Tuesday, the U.S. national debt topped $31 trillion after just 8 months ago. It was at $30 trillion. There's been $7 trillion in stimulus from COVID pandemic to keep the economy afloat, of which about $5 trillion of that is from the Biden administration, and they're not slowing down at all. Can you imagine in just 2 years, he's did $5 trillion, and now we still have 2 years left See what happens with the elections at the end of the year. A lot of economists fear now that it's not sustainable anymore, and now that the interest rates are going up. Now, during the last administration, it starts with a T. I won't say it because they're going to ban my PayPal account because I'm spreading misinformation. That's a joke. But in the last administration, the president, what he wanted to do is roll all the short-term debt into 100-year bonds so we could lock in the interest rate. The Congress, especially Senator Elizabeth Warren, didn't want him to do that. And now we're stuck with having to renew that short-term debt. And since the interest rates are skyrocketing, a lot of people are saying that it's no longer sustainable because the interest rate on the debt is just going to skyrocket. U.S. job market, which is a primary driver of domestic inflation, has started to go down as well due to the fact that the job openings are starting to go down. This is obviously due to the consumption. It's not the only thing, because obviously the printing of the money is another item. But obviously, if there's job openings everywhere and people are not happy and it's hard to find it. Let me start that over. If companies are finding a hard time finding workers because there are so many job openings, then you can just switch from job to job. And every time you switch job to job, they offer you more money. Well, obviously, the cost of labor is the biggest cost for a company. So if people keep switching jobs and it's hard to find workers and companies have to pay more, that means that they're going to have to keep increasing their prices, because obviously a company's not going to make less money because they have to pay more to their labor. See how it works? Now, that's not the only thing, but that's a big driver of the inflation domestically in the United States. The average hourly earnings went up by over 5.2% over the last 12 months, but adjusted for inflation, your actual earnings went down by 2.8%. So the question is, when they give you your yearly raises, are they giving you a raise that's more than that's 10%, which is higher than inflation? Because if they don't, that means that you're losing money every year, considering the fact that the actual inflation rate is about 30-40%, I would say. Political news. The conservative Bolsonaro is going to a runoff for the presidential elections with the socialist Lula in Brazil. Obviously the media is kind of skewed, saying that, oh, we got a lot more votes than was expected. So we'll see how Brazil turns out in the elections. A new PayPal policy and their new terms and conditions allows the company to charge you to literally take out $2,500 from your accounts if they promote quote unquote misinformation. Welcome to the new world order. Once they have the government coins, the central bank digital currencies, if you say something they don't like, they'll just turn off your money. Oh, the preppers were right. Investigation into spikes in newborn baby deaths in Scotland, after it was found that the deaths for babies under 1 year old in Scotland is at its highest level in 10 years. I wonder what could have happened in the last 2 years that could have caused that. And going along with that is the FDA is withholding autopsy results on people who died after getting I'm going to call them the things in your arm after the pandemic, because we don't want to be banned for misinformation, now do we? Economic news, the U.S. housing market, which is roughly 17% of the economy, has the second biggest price decline since the 1930s Great Depression. The biggest from that, obviously, is the 2008-2009 financial crisis. The mortgage apps have collapsed to 25-year lows as the housing recession deepens, and global demand for manufacturing in Asia is starting to take a hit as well, due to the fact that rising costs of materials, in addition to the slumping demand, especially in the West. All the manufacturing in Taiwan and Malaysia fell, where the growth in hubs like India, Japan, and Vietnam was also starting to slow as well. Manufacturing across the Eurozone declined further last month, and even the German manufacturing, which, remember, Germany literally has, if I'm not mistaken, I think a $3 or $4 trillion economy, and that is literally dependent on the $19 billion that they pay in natural gas from Russia. So their manufacturing activity in Germany contracted for the third straight month. French factory activity fell in its fastest pace since May 2020. Italian factory activity fell off again, and the manufacturing output in the UK fell for the third time for 3 months. So you can see red flag, red flag, red flag. U.S. job openings plunged by over 1 million in August, and an early sign that the massive U.S. labor gap is beginning to close. Obviously, with the slumping demand and companies starting to let go of folks, that's going to help with inflation, which might be what they're trying to do with the economy. Available positions are just a touch over 10 million, when that's a 10% drop from about 11.17 million. Biggest 1 month drop since the early days of the pandemic. And the job growth had a slowing amount in the second month as well. The unemployment fell to 3.5%. And the labor force participation also increased. Corporate news, there was a lot of rumors that Credit Suisse, which is a huge bank, if I'm not mistaken, in Switzerland, it's definitely in Europe, announced 3 billion worth of, Swiss francs, they're definitely Swiss. They're trying to conjure up confidence that they're not doing bad by borrowing more money, which supposedly the problem was they were in too much debt and they were in the financial crisis. The HSBC, which is the 7th, if I'm not mistaken, largest bank in the world, definitely the largest in Europe, considering selling their subsidiaries in Canada. And BYD, which is the huge electric vehicle manufacturer, in addition to manufacturer of electric batteries, increased over 10% in Asia trading. This is the company that's actually backed by Warren Buffett. They announced a 187% increase in the delivery of vehicles in September versus a year ago. Tesla announced that they didn't deliver as much as expected. They did announce that they're gonna deliver their first Tesla Semi. I believe it's November 1st, if I'm not mistaken, to Pepsi. And it also went down after Elon Musk said that he is going to go through with the buy of Twitter. The Twitter stocks exploded in value while the Tesla stock went down. And in technology, Apple's gonna have to stop charging for every little thing that they want you to buy special, because with a new EU law starting in 2024, they're going to have to make the same chargers. There's a universal charger now for cell phones in Europe, which is going to be the Type-C charger, which, for example, Samsung uses. Investment news, I mentioned Twitter. Their stock went up over 22% on the news that Musk was going to buy them out, go through with the deal. And then in international events, Ukrainian troops recaptured villages in southern Ukraine. It's a second big front that Russia literally abandoned just a few days after they took control. And Ukraine also took responsibility for taking down a bridge, the main bridge from Crimea in Russia, which is a big escalation. Now, during the week, Russia did deploy their doomsday nuclear ocean drones, NOTAD Poseidon. It's a mega submarine that could literally just go on for weeks and months. And both of them, one, they literally just lost track of. And that goes on to remember, the $290 million purchase of anti-nuclear drugs. So things are definitely not heading in a good direction, unfortunately. Tuesday, North Korea fired ballistic missiles over Japan for the first time in 5 years. A rare warning in northern Japan went out after the missile went off. And President Biden warning on Thursday that there's a highest prospect for nuclear war in the last 60 years. And I sincerely, war isn't good for anybody, but I don't see why this continues to escalate when, both parties can just sit at the table. And in my opinion, was escalated by the U.S. because why does Ukraine need to be a part of NATO? For what? Right? But anyway, I don't want to spread misinformation because they'll charge my account on PayPal. Unusual facts, just 48 years, the world population has doubled in size. We are now at 8 billion people. Kenya is lifting their ban on genetically modified crops as they've had the worst drought in the Eastern Africa region for the last 40 years. An American has to be an American. An American tourist smashed no fewer than 2 ancient Roman sculptures in the Vatican. He wanted to see the Pope. They told him no. He knocked down a statue, went running, knocked down another one. Let's not knock down those beautiful statues in Europe before they ban us from Europe. Bordeaux state officials are warning that the EV batteries, the electric vehicle batteries, are the ones that are waterlogged in a hurricane. They're just exploding in a fire out of nowhere. Super hard to contain due to the materials in the batteries, but just something one to think of if you're considering buying a vehicle. And also the health department in Florida has announced that they are recommending that you not take the thing in your arm for the pandemic virus due to the fact that there's an increased risk of heart problems. Who would have known? Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments with hashtag Ask Marcello. I'll start doing those videos again. And don't forget, preppers were right.